Serial killer plus pedophile plus sociopath plus necrophile equals a story of pure chaos. Ranking high with some of the most notorious serial killers is a man capable of slipping through the fingers of justice and committing unforgivable acts towards children. Today we are going to talk about the one and only Clifford Olson.
Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in again to the Abyss Pod. Things are a little rough down here in Texas, so we hope everyone's safe and not freezing anymore and getting your water and power back and everything.
Yeah, this winter storm has been a doozy.
Yeah.
Needless to say, Brittany and I are sharing a vehicle at the moment. Thank you, Brittany.
It's rough down here. If you're new, don't forget to follow us on the social medias, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for all the updates. Go to our website and see images from the case. This one, we have quite a few, and it can kind of help give you a visual of what's happening. If you're listening on YouTube, subscribe. That really, really helps us out. And leave a comment. Tell us your thoughts or any case suggestions or anything that you want to talk about with the cases. We did want to put a disclaimer on this one. It is another one that deals with the murders of children, so we know that's not everyone's thing, and there's a lot of graphic detail in this one, so if you need to skip it, that's totally fine. We have a ton of other episodes for you to browse through, and hopefully you can find something that you like. So let's jump into the abyss.
Clifford Olson was born on January 1st in 1940. His father was in the Army, and he was the oldest child out of 4. In middle school, he started skipping classes a lot, and he was held back a few times and failed his classes. So he really was struggling in school. Not just because he wasn't a good student, but maybe he just wasn't putting himself forward and pushing himself to do good in the classes. He just didn't really care as much. He was seen as a problem in school, and he ended up dropping out at grade 8. His criminal behavior started up pretty much after he dropped out of 8th grade. He worked on a racetrack for a bit, but he ended up being fired at the age of 16 for forging checks. And then a year later, at the age of 17, he was arrested for breaking and entering. He ended up being sentenced to 9 months in 1957, but crazy, this guy got away with so much stuff. Not even just saying like, oh, the police didn't do their job, so he got away. No, the police did their job. And, well, for the most part, they arrested him. And he still, would slip through their fingers. It's crazy. So he ended up escaping because he was complaining about some trouble while he was urinating. And he was like, oh, it hurts, And so he went to the bathroom to give them a urine sample. And he pricked his finger and put his finger blood in his urine. And so they took him to the doctor without cuffs. And the guards ended up leaving him alone for just a minute, and the boy literally got up and walked out the door. Didn't even have to try hard. Once they got him, this just added time to his sentence. He ended up escaping 6 more times throughout his life in scenarios very similar to this one. So as we were saying, he could just slip literally right through their fingers, and it's all about confidence, as we learn with this case. If you're confident, you can do anything you set your mind to. In 1965, he was in jail for breaking and entering again, and he pretended to get sick again, and guards took him to the infirmary, and he just ran. And they started chasing him, and he was able to escape, and he spent the night under a bridge and then was on the run for about a week before some police dog caught him. He had been harassing these 2 teens with a gun near the border, and Border Patrol had seen him and called, which, if you're on the run and they're looking for you, maybe don't harass people near the border with a gun. That's just you're asking to get arrested.
Yeah, it's some things he's really smart about, and then some things he's just like, meh, it'll work out, and he just does it.
Yeah, it's he can't help himself when it comes to crime. He just has to do it.
Yeah.
So what he ended up doing when Border Patrol called is he hid in a pile of leaves, but another police dog ended up sniffing him out, which, props to the police dogs. One time, Clifford even decided to go back to the prison he had escaped from as a tourist. It was being closed, and it had briefly been open to tours for the public, and so he decided to go back, and he was literally in his old jail cell looking around when a guard noticed him and was like, that's Clifford Olson. You have a warrant. What are you doing here? And arrested him, and he had another month put on his sentence. So literally it was like time after time. Like, it's kind of laughable in a way. Like, how did he just do that? It's all about confidence.
Yeah, definitely. And if someone had recognized him, then he would have just gone on his way.
Yeah, and he didn't even care because he was like, oh, I'll just get out again. Yeah. Another time in his final imprisonment, he was x-rayed and they found a handcuff key in his bowels. So he had, I guess, attained one, swallowed it, and figured he'd scrape it out of his poop later. Between the ages of 17 and 41, he was in and out of prison pretty much the entire time. He was only out for a total of 4 years for a few months at a time, and he had over 100 charges and 83 convictions. These charges included breaking and entering, possessing firearms, theft, fraud, assault, obstruction, escaping, forgery, parole violation, armed robbery. The list goes on and on and on. He was always in trouble for something. In 1978, he was out of prison for a little bit, and he ended up assaulting a 7-year-old girl, and then he was sent back to prison. He tried for parole in 1959 at the age of 19, and he also tried in 72 at the age of 32. And both of the times, they obviously revoked his parole, because why would you let this man out when he's just ran and ran and ran? Isn't that the whole point? Like, when you're on parole, you can't run.
Yeah, so he's like the definition of a flight risk.
Yeah. He was in trouble a lot when he was spending those years in prison. In 1974, he sexually assaulted a 17-year-old fellow inmate. And in 76, he was stabbed 7 times by a fellow inmate for snitching on their drug ring, which doesn't surprise me. He seems like the type that would be like a snitch and slimy and sneaky.
Yeah, apparently he was pretty easy to flip, and he would just snitch on anybody. So the cops liked him, but the inmates didn't.
I would pay to see him and Richard Kuklinski in a room together.
Ooh, that would not go well.
No, it wouldn't. He ended up meeting a man named Gary Francis Marcoux in prison, and Gary had raped and murdered a 9-year-old girl named Jenny Dove. Gary asked Clifford for advice and possibly even an alibi, kind of scheming together. Clifford agreed, but he said Gary needed to write a detailed account of the actual crime so that Clifford would know how to help him out the best. Gary did this, but Clifford ended up turning around, handed the confession to the authorities, and testified against Gary, giving him a life sentence. Being a snitch got Clifford favor in prison and a lot of privileges and even more protection from law enforcement, because they considered him to be someone they could rely on to come forward with information. On September 7th in 1980, Clifford ended up breaking out. No, he didn't break out again. He was released this time from prison, and this is when all hell broke loose. He rented an apartment in New Surrey Village with a woman named Joan Hale, and they had a romantic relationship together. Their romantic relationship was also the source of a child. That's a weird way to say that.
That's a very weird way to say that.
Anyway, they had a child together named Stephen, and they called him Stephen, but they actually named him Clifford III, so this would really follow him with the rest of his life, that his dad was Clifford Olson.
Hopefully he goes by Stephen forever.
Yeah, Stevie boy.
Take a little Sharpie to that, Clifford.
Yeah, change the birth certificate name. Joan was a divorcee that was described as super anxious, and she had been in an abusive relationship, so we know that whenever women come out of these abusive marriages, they tend to be pretty anxious or on edge. You know, it's hard to gain trust back once you fully trusted somebody and they took advantage of that. Clifford was unfortunately reported as being physically abusive, so she went out of an abusive relationship and into another. He also took her divorce settlement money so that he wouldn't have to work as much, so he just pretty much mooched off of her. Sometime in January, Clifford ended up leaving, and he didn't really give any warning about this. And sometime in May, he was in jail for a rape charge that was later dropped because the woman did not appear in court. He ended up trying to find this girl, but she never was found. Luckily, because who knows what he would have done to her. And we've only seen the story one time during our research, so the details were a little bit fuzzy, but basically the woman was never found by Clifford and the whole accusation got dropped.
So the end of 1980 is when he really ramped up his crimes. Some people think he may have started much before this, but this is what we know for sure from his own reports, his own words. On November 17th, 1980, Christine Ann Weller, a 12-year-old girl, was riding her bike and just vanished. Her parents didn't report her missing until a week later. She was just labeled as a runaway, and they figured she was with friends or had just gone off on her own.
Which I think, like, even though she was 12, like, report her. Like, the thing is say she was a runaway. A week with a 12-year-old being on her own out in this chaotic world we have. Like, are you serious?
Yeah, I will never understand that. I don't care if she ran away. If you find her at a friend's house 10 minutes later, like, it's important to have the police know, especially in cases like these.
Yeah, and say we didn't know that Clifford did it, they would be prime suspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unfortunately, her body was found more than a month later on Christmas Day. A man was walking his dog along the Fraser River and found her body. She had been strangled with a belt and stabbed multiple times, and her body had been mutilated as well. And 6 days after the birth of his son, Stephen, he would kill again. This time it was 13-year-old Colleen Marion Denal. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It's a French name. She disappeared on April 16th, 1981, and the police thought she was a runaway as well. And her body was found 5 months later. On April 22nd, 1981, Clifford abducted Darren Todd Johnsrude, a 16-year-old. He was hanging out at a local mall, and Clifford pulled up and offered him a ride and told him he might have a job for him. Clifford then hit him in the head with a hammer and disposed of his body in a ditch, and he was found a couple weeks later. That May, Clifford was accused of molesting a 5-year-old girl. There was no evidence in the case, so it was just an accusation. There were no charges laid.
Which is really interesting, and like he even talks about it later on when we bring it up. He says himself he like would kill some and then not kill others. Like, where was the boundary for that? You know, like, why didn't he kill that 5-year-old girl if he molested her, but yet he's going to kill these other children who he's also molesting?
Yeah, and he, like I said with Darren, he would kind of offer these kids rides. He would hang out in these places where he knew kids were going to be and tell them he had jobs for them, or that, you know, he could pay them a lot of money for just a little work or something like that. So he said he would do that dozens of times. Like, he did it over and over again. So yeah, I don't know what clicked in his head when he decided he was going to kill one or just let them go. That's just really scary because only he can really tell you what the defining factors are.
Yeah, it's like Survivor, like drawing rocks kind of thing.
Yeah. That May 15th of 1981 is when he gets married to Joan Hale, and 5 days after his wedding, he kills again. This time it's 16-year-old Sandra Wolfsteiner. She was hitchhiking to her boyfriend's place and disappeared on May 19th, and it would be a long time before her body was found. In June of 1981, Clifford killed Ada Anita Court. She went missing walking home, and again, her body would not be found for quite a while. And then July of 1981, he ramps up even more. So he had obviously been killing pretty consistently, like pretty
one
much
to two people a month,
yeah,
kind of thing.
And now in July, he just takes off. And that makes a lot of people, including me, think that he had probably killed a lot more people before this, because like, what would make him ramp up that hard just in 1 month?
Yeah, and obviously he had been in and out of prison, but every time he was out, he would assault somebody or he would do a crime. So what's to say that even in those times, not to mention now he's been out for a huge chunk of time, that he's not just going hard while he can? It's like he just wants to commit a crime because he can.
Yeah, and nothing really prevents it. Like, we've seen some serial killers, you know, they have a major life event like a child or a marriage, and then they just stop for a while, a few months or something, but days later he was doing that. So it's obvious that nothing else really mattered to him, that no life event was really big enough to make him stop. Yeah,
and like those events should have been something that instilled so much joy and happiness in him that he didn't need to fulfill that void of whatever he's trying to fill during those times. But it was like he had a kid and then he went and killed someone. He got married and then he went and killed someone. Like, he didn't even care.
On July 2nd, Clifford killed Simon Partington, a 9-year-old who was just riding his bike to a friend's house. This one, at least, was immediately seen as foul play, not as a runaway, which is good because most of the other ones were just deemed runaways or the police didn't really care. Simon was unfortunately abducted, raped, and strangled. And then just 5 days later, he sexually assaulted a teen girl. And 2 days after that, he killed 14-year-old Judy Kozma. She was from Westminster, New Westminster, and she was on her way to an interview at the local Wendy's. This time, actually, Clifford had another person in the car with him, though, 18-year-old Randy Ludlow. Randy was friends with Clifford through his father. Clifford and his father went to the same gym, and they would hang out sometimes, so he would kind of ride around with him, and I guess they hung out, which is kind of weird, but whatever.
BFFs.
So when the two were riding around and they saw Judy on her way to this interview, they stopped to pick her up. She was coming out of a phone booth, having just made a call, and Clifford basically offered her a ride to this interview and was kind of hyping her up and even offered to give her a better job. Obviously in the 80s, the minimum wage was pretty low. So he would go around and offer like $10 an hour if you did, easy work, like offers that were hard to pass up for kids especially. Clifford even stopped to buy beer and kept giving it to Judy. Randy was getting pretty uncomfortable with like the whole ordeal, and he would stop pouring alcohol into the cup. He just gave her soda so she could kind of have a break, because this 14-year-old girl, she probably wasn't a very experienced drinker, and he was trying to ply her with a lot of alcohol. But eventually Randy had had enough, and he asked Clifford to drop him off, and he did. Once alone, Clifford drugged Judy to have her pass out. Then he raped and strangled her, and she was found in late July near Weaver Lake. He even went the extra horrible step of taking her address book and calling her friends and threatening them that he was going to kill them next, that they weren't safe, and that's pretty inhuman to do to someone.
Honestly, and like at the time it could have felt like a joke, like, oh, someone's just prank calling, like it's not funny. But then I bet it was really scary when they found out that their friend was dead or missing, and then sitting here and thinking, who called me? And being involved in a case like that would be so scary, even as an adult, much more a child.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that entire scenario and him being amused by that,
Yeah.
On July 23rd, Clifford abducted Raymond King Jr., a 15-year-old. Again, he promised him an easy job that paid a lot of money, and Raymond agreed. And so Clifford said, okay, let's celebrate with alcohol, and again, plied him with lots of alcohol. Raymond was really just trying to help out his family. His dad was battling cancer and hadn't been able to work for a while. He had been through 2 surgeries, so Raymond was just trying to get some money to help his family. After drugging Raymond, Clifford raped and bludgeoned him to death with a rock. Several days later, Clifford abducted a German tourist, Sigrun Arndt. She was 18, and she was seen talking to Clifford a few times. She was seen with him at a pub, and she was seen with him on the subway. So it seemed like he had seen this kind of easy target and sort of was hanging out with her the whole day. She was very kind of naive, and she had even written in her journal that the people in Canada were so nice and that she didn't feel afraid. So she may have let her guard down a little bit too much with that. Again, she was raped and bludgeoned with a hammer, and this was only a couple days after Raymond was killed. And then just a few days after that, he killed Terry Lynn Carson, a 15-year-old that was waiting for the bus. He offered her a ride again, saying that he was going the same exact way that she was going, and he asked why she was headed that part of town. She said that she was looking to get a job at a pet store, and she just loved working with animals and wanted to contribute to her family, just like Raymond, and even wanted a little bit of extra money for herself. Terry was really cautious, and she had been warned by her parents of kind of the stranger danger thing, but Clifford had that personality that just put people at ease, and people just felt safe with him. He told her that he had a construction company and that he was looking for some teenagers to help him out cleaning houses. Again, he offered her $10 an hour, which is a lot for that time period. I think minimum wage was about $3.50 at that time, so $10 is quite a step up from that. He even said that he could help her get an apartment for super cheap because he owned apartments and could get her the hookup, which again, this is such a evil thing, just like the calls to the friends. Like, he knew that he was probably going to kill this girl, and just getting her hopes up and being like, oh, I can pay you all this money, I can get you this cool apartment, I can help your family and do all these things, and just like building her hopes up more and more and more. When she accepted this job, he bought the alcohol, plied her with alcohol, and as they got closer to dropping her off, she was very drunk, and he gave her some pills and said that the pills would take away the effects of the alcohol. He even pretended to take some himself, so she took a few of them and passed out completely. Clifford then raped and sodomized her and stabbed her in the skull with a screwdriver, but she was still alive at this point. He dragged her down to the river and put her face down in the water and stood on the back of her neck until she stopped moving. Then he cut up her clothes and kind of scattered her belongings all over the place. He even tossed the weapon along the road and burned some of her belongings. And just 3 days after that, on July 30th, Clifford abducted Louise Chartrand, a 17-year-old. She was hitchhiking to work as a waitress. And we don't have as many details about her death, but her body would be found much later as well. So just in that July period of time, he killed more than half of his total victims, if you believe that those are the only victims that he killed. But it really seems like there were a lot more back there, somewhere in that timeline, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't add up that he just, they found every single person, because clearly he was doing it almost every day.
And sometimes he would just kind of toss their bodies. Sometimes he would try to burn their stuff or scatter it around.
So different MOs.
Yeah. And so many of these were labeled as runaways that they didn't even know there was a serial killer here, even though in this small area there were so many murders. But so many of them were just like, oh, they ran away, it doesn't matter, that they didn't even put it together until way too late.
Yeah. Clearly, Clifford had a long history of criminal behavior way before he even, was an adult, even when he was 17. So he was questioned by the police, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him initially, although they were going to keep their close eyes on him because clearly he's a good suspect. In July of 1981, so the same month that he was killing the 6 kids, authorities had their sights on him for Ada Court's case, a murder from back in the month of June. On July 15th, Olson was brought up at a conference from law enforcement, and they basically confessed that they had a case being built against him. They said that he was a super evasive driver and he was constantly turning around and going in circles, and it was just super hard to follow him anywhere, which we know Richard Kuklinski also did that. He would just lose the tail that he had going on, if that makes sense, the tail of police officers that were just trailing him. On August 12th in 1981, they officially made their arrest of Clifford Olson. This was based on suspicion that he had abducted 2 girls. About 2 weeks later, on the 25th of August, he was charged with the murder of Judy Kozma. Authorities got what they needed when Randy Ludlow said he had been in the car with Judy and that she had been picked up. They rode around for about an hour, and then he just basically relayed all the events to the police officers of what happened that night before he left. Clifford's official trial started on January 11th in 1982. About 3 days after his trial started, he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty on all counts. And he ended up setting up a deal with the police. This is literally mind-boggling to Brittany and I, so buckle your seatbelt to get ready for this one.
Insane.
Clifford told the police that he would tell them all of the information about the missing 11 children, as well as point them into the direction of the bodies. Great. That's what the police want. That's what they go for. And they're like, sure, we'll work with you. His reasoning behind what they'll give him was a little crazy. So this is a direct quote from the agreement that he drew up with the police. Quote, "This is an undertaking of an agreement between the RCMP and Clifford Robert Olson. The following will be paid by the RCMP to Miss Joan Olson for the following information. The agreement shall be binding in law as to not disclose this information in this agreement to the Canadian press. The following missing persons are covered in this agreement: Judy Kozma, Darren Johnsrude, Raymond King, Simon Partington, Ada Court, Louise Chartrand, Christine Weller, Terry Lynn Carson, Colleen Denal, and Sandra Wolfsteiner, and one unidentified female, which will be Sigmund Arndt, but they don't know that at this point. $10,000 will be paid to Miss Olson up to a total of the recovery of 7 bodies, end quote. So I know that was a lot to read, but just to give you a gist, they were basically going to give them, I think it was like $10,000 for every body that they found.
Basically. And the other, I think, super interesting part in that is that they wouldn't disclose this to the press at all. So they wanted it to be totally secret, which obviously it wouldn't stay that way.
Yeah. So his son and his wife ended up receiving a total of $100,000. And it's like, you know, oh, your dad killed people, so now you can go to college. You know, like, what? That just doesn't make sense to me. Allegedly, he called his wife saying, quote, honey, you're going to be rich, end quote. Bleh. Gag. That's disgusting. During this whole meeting, she was nearly catatonic, like in a daze, just not responsive to anything. We can clearly relate to her in some way. Like, she just found out her husband was killing all of these children. She has a child with him. Like, you know, that's concern for her baby as well. They let him walk around without cuffs, also smoking a cigar while the money was being counted out in cash to him and his lawyer. So it's like he was just chilling. Yeah, and they were like, oh, yeah, here. It was like he was running the joint with the police.
That's definitely how he felt. He was definitely like, I'm in control. Like, you're doing my bidding. No cares in the world.
And the families of the victims and the public in general were very furious about this when they found out.
As they should be.
Yes, very clearly. I mean, we're furious that that's something that happened, and we weren't even, you know, in the town or had the kids that we knew, or like family friends that had the kid that they knew, you know. And so this decision cost some politicians their careers. 6 of the families sued for damages and received a total of $100,274.87, but Clifford had no money, and thus they just couldn't pay. Crazy. I just don't understand that at all. The families then turned to the $100,000 that Joan had received for the confession, but it was ordered for her to keep the money and that the families got nothing, which is crazy. I understand that they were signed in a contract to give it to Joan, but I think that anything after that, if they wanted to sue Joan for something, that is not the police's place to step in. Like, that's her money now. They've gave it over. And so if they wanted to sue, I think the family should have gotten that money.
Yeah, they definitely deserved it a lot more.
In January of 1982, Randy Ludlow was also arrested for failing to appear in court on an unrelated charge when he tried to apply for government assistance. So he ended up also being in court, which I think is relevant because he was there with Judy. He didn't say anything right off the bat, you know, so I think that that is something that he could have stepped in and changed. So it's good that he at least got held accountable in some sort of way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, through my research, I saw a lot of people think that he probably was more involved.
Yeah. I mean, how are you friends with a man like Olson, who's so sociopathic, so egotistic, doesn't care about other people, like clearly shows no remorse whatsoever for his actions and was willing to do it in front of you? Like, if he trusted you that much.
Yeah, and even if no murders had taken place, just a grown man constantly picking up like teenage girls,
getting them drunk and slipping them drugs, like he
just
witnessed
that alone,
yeah,
that's enough.
That's a little sleazy.
Clifford was given as many concurrent life sentences.
Concurrent.
Concurrent life sentences as possible under Canadian law. And he was in prison with some of the most dangerous criminals, as he should be. He's definitely one of the most infamous.
Yeah, I mean, even if he didn't commit the crazy crimes, just the sheer fact that he can escape so easily, he should be in super confined areas.
Clifford was reportedly a massive whiner, and he always had something to say about his treatment in prison. He was always complaining about something, trying to sue somebody.
Ready? Let's just get the picture together. Ready? Sneaky, snitch, whiny, and a child killer and rapist. Not a good person at all.
Pretty much the worst
the worst person. Yeah.
Like, I don't know how
you could take out the end, and just being a whiner and a snitch is annoying, you know, like
genuinely the worst kind of person that could possibly ever exist. Anything that happened to Clifford, from not liking the food to not liking the conditions of his cell was basically cruel and unusual punishment to him, so he would sue them all over the place for everything. And in true Clifford fashion, in May of 1986, he wrote a letter to Darren Johnsrude's family. And was it an apology? Was it remorse? Nope. It was a graphic account of what he had done to Darren. So he sent that to his parents for just to be cruel.
I would put myself in prison just to beat him up.
Clifford also mailed pornography and all kinds of graphic things to other families and to politicians in Parliament and to anyone he could get his hands on, basically.
He was very much egocentric. Like, he thought he was on top of the world. He thought he could do whatever he wanted and that he could sit here and antagonize other people and have the run of the police station and the courts. And he was just a joke, honestly.
But he kind of did get his way a lot. He was not supposed to have contact with outside world, but he would mail letters out, all the stuff. He was not supposed to have phone calls, but he would call people all the time, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day. So they were not keeping track of him, or at least they didn't care what he was doing, really. So he really was getting his way a lot, which is just so frustrating for someone like that. Because, like, the only thing that is a just punishment for him is to cut that off. Because he thrives on that attention. So if you just don't give him the attention, don't give him the opportunity to get attention, I think that's the worst punishment. Sometimes Clifford claimed that he killed a lot more than 11 people. But again, he wanted attention so much. So it's sort of the Richard Cottingham thing where he said he was this huge prolific serial killer. And it's like, is he capable of it? Absolutely. But is he just doing that for attention? We have no idea. Police ended up looking into him as a possible suspect in 23 deaths of young women and children in one kind of set of cases. And then also another set of cases that was 14 people. Both of them sort of lined up with where Clifford was and his basic MO and how he liked to go about his crimes. So it's definitely possible he was involved. He admitted to sexually assaulting up to 40 children between the ages of 5 and 10 and up to 100 children between the ages of 16 and 18 using the hitchhiking or the job with good pay kind of ruse. He would hang out around the malls, churches, schools, anywhere where kids were walking home or might need a ride. And he really knew how to pick kids that were kind of vulnerable or desperate for money or kind of naive. He was just one of those people that was really good at picking his victims, I feel like. He had also said that he became morbidly fascinated with how children, quote, went through the process of dying, end quote, which is like one of the most heartbreaking sentences you could ever read.
Makes me want to just like karate chop him in the throat. Like, it makes me so
Honestly.
mad.
In 1989, Arlene Bynon, a radio broadcaster in Canada, had sort of a little radio documentary about Ted Bundy, and Clifford, again, not supposed to have any contact with the outside world, called her show from jail and basically claimed he was more prolific and like Ted Bundy had nothing on him, sort of. So he was just desperate for people to give him that attention. In the early 90s, Olson even claimed that he knew exactly who the Green River Killer was, and he even gave police a photograph, which turned out to just be some random guy who wrote letters to inmates trying to help them find God while they're in prison. And he just basically picked this guy and was like, yeah, he's the Green River Killer, even though this guy was from New Zealand and had never been in the area that the Green River Killer was. And it was just absurd. Like,
he acts like all of the serial killers got together for like a powwow and he
Yeah.
knew everyone. Like,
so strange. On August 19th of 1997, Olson attempted to get parole, but he was obviously denied. He tried to use something called the faint hope clause, which allowed early release for inmates after 15 years, even if they got life sentences. But it was pretty much immediately dismissed. On July 18th of 2006, he had his second parole hearing. This time it took them 30 minutes to say no. But in this hearing, Olson claimed that the U.S. would give him clemency because he knew really important information about 9/11. So he said that the Canadian authorities didn't have any jurisdiction over him and that he was supposed to be sent to the US, which again is a very easily verifiably false thing. That's not like, did he think people were gonna be like, oh, okay, just go on,
like not back check him?
What did he think was gonna happen? Like 9/11 was one of the biggest investigations like in history, and you don't think someone's gonna like make a call and be like, hey.
Yeah, I'm sure it gets boring in jail and he just needed something for entertainment.
Making up stories. As if the $100,000 scandal wasn't enough, on March 21st, 2010, it came out that Olson had been collecting $1,100 a month for his old age security payments, which is basically like Social Security for us here in the States. And that he had been paid that since 2005 when he turned 65. So obviously people again were very outraged. This man was getting so much money for nothing. And on June 1st, 2012, the law was changed so prisoners couldn't collect the money until after they were released. On November 30th, 2010, he attempted release again, dismissed again. And on September 21st of 2011, Sharon Rosenfeld, the mother of Darren Johnsrude, said that authorities had told her Olson had terminal cancer and that he was dying. He had cancer since 2004, but it had gone into remission and he was doing okay. But on September 30th of 2011, he died of cancer at the age of 71. Just to kind of, I guess, be another jab at people after he died, he had lied and told lots of people that he was going to leave money to the victims' families and make sure they were taken care of, but he did no such thing.
I probably wouldn't be surprised, though.
Yeah.
Like, if I was the families, I wouldn't be expecting to get money from him.
During his time in prison, he had somewhat befriended, I use that term very lightly, a journalist named Peter Worthington. Peter knew Clifford for about 25 years, and Clifford thought that Peter liked him, I guess, but Peter was kind of just fascinated with him. So he was a journalist. He wanted that like primary story, but Clifford thought that they were pals, I guess. And he even invited Peter to come to his parole hearing. Basically, he thought Peter was going to speak on his behalf and be like, he's, fine to be let out. He's a good person now. He's changed or whatever. But Peter literally went to the judge and was like, absolutely not. Do not ever let him out. He should never be let out. So kind of backfired. But Clifford apparently was like laughing when Peter was saying this. Like he thought it was kind of a joke, but Peter was like, no, seriously, like don't let him out.
Honestly, it's like I feel weird laughing about it, but I feel like Clifford's life in prison and in the court is almost like a comedy movie. Like he's just like being absolutely ridiculous, like coming up with things that are easily like deniable when you find out. Like it literally took them 30 minutes to find out that he was lying.
Yeah.
And he's like complaining about the dirt on the floor or something like that and saying that he's being neglected.
Yeah, cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, and now he thinks he's best friends with this guy who's like, you're a killer, and the guy's like, no, he's awful, and he's like, ha, this is so funny, you're such a cool friend or whatever. Like it just almost seems laughable.
It is completely absurd. Clifford had actually met Peter through Arlene's radio show. Peter had been on that show sometimes, I guess, so he started talking after Clifford had called into the show and kind of knew him through that. And again, Clifford not allowed to make calls. I think he was allowed 2 calls per month. And Peter said that he would call him 4 or 5 times a day sometimes, just like constantly, which had to be annoying.
Yeah, I feel like if we're going to have all of these rules that we have in play, they're there for a reason. Obviously, like they've had troubles in the past with it maybe. So we should probably hold this guy who takes advantage of the rules accountable.
And how hard is it to make sure he doesn't make phone calls? Like they said that he always seemed to have a cell phone on him, always seemed to have like ability to get to the phone.
How?
Why? Like,
yeah.
You have access to everything he owns. Where's he hiding this phone?
You literally monitor him 24/7.
Yeah.
How do you let that happen?
It's not like this was 1960. Like,
no.
There's cameras everywhere. I just don't understand. So Clifford and Peter talked a lot through letters and calls, and Clifford apparently told Peter he didn't know why he killed. Like we said, he had picked up a lot more kids than the ones that he killed, so he said he didn't know what that determining factor is, I guess, but I think he had to know. Obviously, he had to know.
I think if he would have just like, even if he was like, oh, well, I don't know, I'm sure that if he really thought on it, he could find a reason why.
Clifford ended up writing a 50-page manuscript detailing the murders. And when I say detailing, I mean detailing. And he said that no one was allowed to read it until his son, Stephen, who was under 3 at this point. I'm not sure exactly how old he was. But he wanted to wait until Stephen turned 21. He said, quote, I want these left for my son so he'll better understand his dad, end quote. Which
I don't think I would even want to understand my dad.
No.
Like, if that was the case, no. And I would just burn them. If I was Joan and he was like, oh, hold this for Stephen, I'd say, oh, what manuscript? And I just light it on fire.
Yeah.
Let it burn away.
Yeah, so strange. If I was Stephen's mother, I would never want him to even know at all that he was anyway related to that. But Clifford actually gave the manuscript to his lawyer, Bob Shantz, and Bob apparently has like boxes and boxes in a storage unit somewhere full of stuff from Clifford, like letters and all kinds of stuff that he just keeps,
which I'm sure Clifford loves.
Yeah. The lawyer said that he pretty much only represented Clifford out of morbid curiosity, and I mean, everyone's entitled to, you know, their fair trial and stuff, so like somebody had to represent him, but I just ugh. But even the lawyer said that the $100,000 deal thing was bad. He said, quote, I think it was politically insane and I do not approve of it. We all know police pay informants, but I don't think they should pay the culprit, end quote, which I completely agree with. I'm sure sitting in that room as the cash was being counted out had to be surreal for everyone.
I know. Think about where that money could go to help other people who didn't have someone who murdered a bunch of children.
Like literally getting paid to murder people. Like,
yeah.
No other way to say that.
Yeah, literally. Even though it's going to Joan, I mean, if he was making money with the job, who does it go to? Your family. You know, like you support your family. So it's like he basically got paid like that was his job.
Yeah.
Clifford obviously didn't fit the typical pattern of a serial killer. We can tell that just from what we've told you. He didn't wet the bed. He wasn't abused. He didn't have signs of arson. He loved animals. Brittany did find in one place that he might have smothered a rabbit at some point, but it wasn't corroborated, so it's not really set in stone. But to our knowledge, he liked animals.
Especially dogs. He loved dogs.
And he also didn't bully others, so it's just a totally obscure situation that he's out of the box from what you would normally consider a normal serial killer's stereotypes. Peter said Clifford seemed at home in prison. He was described as really cheerful and enthusiastic and resourceful. If anything, we can call him an optimistic person because it seems like he was having a ball with whatever situation he was handed. He told Peter that he would definitely kill again if he was released. So, you know, it kind of takes me back to that case where, who was it, Brittany, that was like going on parole or something, and he was like, don't let me go because like I will attack the police officer who comes and checks on me. And they were like, oh, he'll be fine. And they like let him out anyway. Yeah.
I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about.
Well, he was basically like that, where he was like, if you let me out, like I'm going to kill again. So don't do it, basically. But I'm going to still file for parole.
Yeah, but let me out, but don't let me out. But let me out.
Yeah. Like a little bit too much information.
Like, basically, let me out so I can kill again.
Like, exactly. Also, he told this to another officer and said he would, quote, pick up where he left off, end quote, if he was released. So clearly he was not ashamed of anything he had done and was fully willing to do it again. He flip-flopped back and forth, likely for his own amusement and entertainment. He said he would have gone for the death penalty if he was on the jury, and the next day he said he would say that the death penalty was barbaric and that no one deserved it. So back and forth. Also, he would pretend to be eaten up with guilt for what he'd done. He would say that he was so remorseful and yada, yada, yada. But then he would be super cheerful and describe himself as the beast of British Columbia.
And anyone that has remorse doesn't like send a graphic detail to the family or write a manuscript like detailing the murder, you know, like.
Yeah. And like if you were remorseful, you wouldn't want your son to know that. So why would you be like, let him read it when he's 21? Like
I don't think he even thought what he was doing was bad. Like, he just thought of himself as like a celebrity.
Yeah. And going into his lack of remorse, he was also diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, and he was also diagnosed with a narcissistic disorder, psychopathic personality. He was a sexual sadist, a pedophile, and a necrophile, so he covered all the board.
Whole gambit.
A forensic sorry, excuse me. A forensic psychiatrist said, quote, "He can kill, not out of anger or bitterness, but in a lighthearted way as a sport. He doesn't grasp the enormity or the horror of what he's done. He is a personality which is devoted to exploiting and harming other people in his own interests," end quote. Which is like, boom. Like, that is a mic drop statement if I've ever heard one.
Perfectly summed up.
When the psychiatrist was doing interviews with Clifford, he said he felt as though he was a hero for telling the authorities where the bodies were and suggesting that the families were overreacting in their disdain for him. Excuse me? Yeah, that's just insane that thinks he feels like a hero for telling where the bodies were. Excuse me, you didn't find them and tell the bodies. You killed them, then just told the bodies. Like, it's not the same thing. No hero here. He even started comparing his situation to the circumstances in World War II, saying, quote, "We're friendly with the Germans and the Japanese now, so let's get over this too. Let's not make such a big deal out of this," end quote. Which, like, families lost their children.
Killing children and, like, brutalizing them.
Yeah, not just like killing them like, I shot them. Like, literally mutilating them, taking advantage of their bodies. Like, it's just gross, disgusting, like, inappropriate. Yeah, and just get over it. What? This has been, like, a few years or something. Well, I don't know about the exact interview, but
I mean, they're never gonna get over, like, as they shouldn't. Like, it's the worst thing that could ever happen.
Yeah.
And he's like, meh, it's whatever.
Which just shows his lack of remorse and, like, his sociopathic tendencies to just think that, well, you know, it's like when your dog got ran over, just get over it. Like, that's just it. Even when, like, you lose a pet, like, it takes years to get over that sometimes, and you think about them still and you might get teary-eyed, you know, like, you never fully get over losing somebody. Mm-hmm. He ended up scoring a 38 out of 40 on the Hare psychopath checklist, which is one of the highest that the forensic psychologist had ever seen, although I do know that someone hit 40 one time. I'm not sure who it was,
we had talked about that recently.
Yeah, you can probably Google it. I think there's like a list somewhere where you can see it, and like Ted Bundy's around like 38, 39, John Wayne Gacy, all of them, and I think there's one person who hit 40, but he's the only person who ever has. Also, there's a photo of Olson being sold right now on the internet on like a website called True Crime Auction, and it's signed on the back for like $55, and I think that's just disgusting. If anything, that's like idolizing, or like, because you think about, people want to buy these autographs from celebrities, so why would you make him feel like a celebrity? Like, it's just disgusting.
Yeah, I think those websites, the like murder auction, or I forget what it's called, murder or something, and the true crime auction are just gross. You're
like, you should take that and give it to a museum and be done.
Yeah.
Like, if anything, because there's like those ones, I think we saw one over in like Scotland or England or something, where they had a museum of like murders that had happened, and there's also some other ones from like where it was like a museum of things that had, you know, horrific things that had happened. And I mean, if you want to do anything with it, give it to that. Personally, I would just burn it.
Yeah, no one needs a signed photo of him.
No. Peter said in a Huffington Post article, quote, "In death, Clifford Olson's soul will not rest in peace, for he has no soul, only appetites. He will not be missed," end quote. And Peter even released a book a year later after Olson's death, talking about the interviews and using some of his manuscripts that he had gotten from Clifford Olson.
Which I read a little bit of the book, and it's pretty intense, so just
read at your own discretion.
Yeah, exactly. In the end, Clifford Olson got pretty much everything he wanted and didn't really get punished as much as he should have. So what can we do better in the future to make sure that these things don't repeat themselves?